This week, Michael Mumcuoglu, the CEO and co-founder of Cardinal Ops, joins us to discuss the art of detection engineering. Then, in the enterprise security news, Axonius raises $200 million and is doing $100 million ARR. Clarity raises $100 million and is also doing $100 million ARR. CrowdStrike picks up DSPM with Flow Security. Cycode picks up Bearer. Are attackers like lawyers? How a bank failed with no help from a cyber attack. The FTC cracks down on customer data collection. Apple's car sadly won't be a thing anytime soon, or maybe ever. All that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more. 2024 will be the year of cryptography, driven by compliance requirements like PCI DSS 4.0 and the long-awaited NIST-standardized post-quantum algorithms. No longer can enterprises take their cryptography for granted. Cipher Insights from Quantum Exchange brings clarity to cyber risk blind spots that other point-and-scan solutions miss. The continuous network monitoring and response tool flags, scores, and prioritizes dozens of crypto risk factors in near real time, displayed through a single user-friendly dashboard for efficient management and remediation. Empower your NOC and SOC teams with actionable intelligence. Demonstrate proof of strong encryption required for zero trust. Gain the visibility and crypto inventory needed to begin your quantum-safe journey. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/quantum exchange.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and happy National Cereal Day and National Flapjack Day. There aren't enough days for both of those to get their own days, and they've got to share? What's that about? This episode is 352, recorded on Thursday, March 7th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and I've got an excellent guest with me today. But before we get to him, let's go over a quick announcement here about the RSA conference. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their full conference pass. The RSA conference will take place May 6th through May 9th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC24 and use the code 54U-SEC Weekly. 54U-SEC Weekly. We hope to see you there. I'll be there for sure. We'll be doing micro interviews. I'm speaking at B-Side San Francisco also. It's going to be a good time. I'm pretty excited. So today's topic is detection engineering and stopping breaches. We're excited to have Michael Mumcuoglu, CEO and co-founder of Cardinal Ops, with us today. Prior to Cardinal Ops, Michael co-founded LightCyber, which was acquired by Palo Alto Networks in 2017, which he stuck around there for a while before starting this organization. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very much. Great being here.
Yeah, and this is a super interesting space to me, very close to a lot of things I've done, even from the beginning of my career. One of the first big projects that I worked on when I moved from the IT side into the security side back in 2003, 2004, was setting up a SIEM, and attempting to do some detection engineering and looking for anomalies and things. We had no idea what we were doing back then. The very first thing I did is shove every log I could find into the SIEM, and instantly became a nightmare. I had 100 million events a day pouring in there, over 1,700 devices, and all of a sudden it was the full-time job of at least one, maybe two people, just to keep it running and to keep all these log sources going in. So we did not do it correctly. back in those days.
You're not alone. You're not alone. I think this is a super common problem, and in some senses, it's become even harder. I think not easier over the years. Maybe the IT aspect has become easier because the SIEM infrastructure itself is now very typically hosted in the cloud, delivered via SaaS. But everything else except the infrastructure has in many ways become even harder.
Yeah, we had physical devices running like an embedded version of Windows 2000 and 7 terabytes to play with, and it filled up half a rack, and there are different appliances that had to talk to each other. I imagine just pushing all the stuff in the cloud has simplified just a lot of the overhead and maintenance aspect of owning a SIEM.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe the cost is another topic. I think now we hear from many organizations that are super concerned about the cost because they can very easily go out of control. It's very easy to collect lots and lots of data, as you mentioned. Hundreds of millions of events per day, and that of course accumulates very quickly. So that is an interesting challenge by itself.
Yeah, just fast forwarding, the lens I'm going to use for this conversation is kind of as I went through my career, because after that experience, I became a pen tester. And as a lot of pen testers found, it was very easy to achieve whatever goals you had as a pen tester to get in. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit back in these days. I was a pen tester, I think, between 2008, 2007, and 2012, so for about 4 or 5 years there, and I've done pen tests on and off ever since then. But that's one of the experiences you have, is you always wonder, okay, I created this domain admin account, I created these local accounts, I turned antivirus off to do something and then back on to do something. You're thinking, when is somebody going to see any of the stuff that I'm doing? Because I'm not trying to be stealthy here. And that's a story I've heard time and time again from a lot of different pen testers, which led me to thinking, maybe a pen test isn't exactly what people need. If they're not even noticing that domain admin accounts are being created from printer IP addresses, or whatever crazy thing the pen tester is doing that should send up red flags. So I founded later on, after becoming an industry analyst and starting my own firm. I focused on, building a service from the ground up that would help with this, because I realized what people need is they need help configuring things, all that glue that once you have all the products and everything, makes everything work together, which, reminds me a lot of what you've built here with Cardinal Ops is, okay, you've got the people, you got the tools, but you're not seeing anything. So let's now, sprinkle in what the glue that's actually going to make all this stick together and make you effective, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very much so. And actually, my story, my experience, and how we eventually founded Cardinal Ops is starting from a very, very similar origin story, right? I think one of them is a point where I realized that at that point, 97% of pen tests got domain admin within 3 days without being detected. That is, in any objective test, any way of measurement, that is a complete failure, right? It means that we're completely failing on one hand, and on the other hand, what you're seeing is that enterprises are investing more and more and more. They are buying more and more tools, state-of-the-art tools. These tools are performing amazing in the lab in perfect conditions. They have huge capabilities, but in practice, when you actually take that, these enterprises take the test, they fail the test again and again, and that moment is where I realized that something is broken, right? And that it's not that these organizations, after buying 60 or 80 different security tools, what they need to do is buy 200 more tools. What they actually need to do is focus on implementing the existing tools and get them to be as effective as possible. And that is really the origin kind of story of what brought us to found Cardinal. And maybe the first insight into that was that problem back then was basically solved exclusively through people, right? People trying to understand what's going on, trying to manage these 60 different technologies that are, of course, in almost all, exclusively, so in all cases, they are actually provided by many different vendors. And try to imagine yourself, right, trying to cope with that complexity, trying to understand, are all these tools properly configured? Are they monitoring for the right threats? Are they integrated into one in the proper way? Do they have the proper security controls? And doing all of that in a changing environment. And that, I think, touches a little bit on my previous comment on how things are becoming actually harder, is the fact that the environment basically is changing all the time. Attackers are evolving, right? They're basically always getting more and more sophisticated. We're learning about these new attacks in the news, and I'm sure also here on the podcast you're talking about these new types of attacks. You have the security tools themselves changing, being replaced, getting upgraded, and the technologies we're trying to protect, the technologies, the business critical applications, the SaaS applications, everything is also changing and evolving to support the business. So try to imagine basically solving that hard problem when it's a moving target. It's basically the complexity is just exponentially growing.
Yeah, and I got the impression that before you could buy a commercial tool to help with detection engineering, this kind of thing, before XDR became a thing, a lot of it was communities. A lot of it was ISACs. There were different mailing lists and things like that where people would share, the detections that they had created, and whether it's a snort rule, a YAML file, whatever format this is in. What part do you work with the communities at all, and what part do the communities play now that there are commercial solutions that are helping with this?
Mm-hmm. So I would say there are two aspects to this. The first are open source detection repositories, and those are becoming more and more popular. It's now some commercial products open source their detections. Some communities and some are basically publishing other detections in that open source fashion, which provides also tracking and versioning, which are of course also beneficial. So definitely those. The financial ISACs of the world are still there and are continuing to serve the community. And maybe the last aspect, which is I think very tightly coupled to our topic today of detection engineering, is also MITRE ATT&CK, right? Which is a community that it's basically a project that started from a nonprofit organization, but today it's really a community effort where the industry is constantly contributing to this catalog of attacker techniques to be able to document the different ways that attackers are exploiting enterprise networks to gain their objectives. And to that community effort, actually, we're also actively contributing to that. We believe it's a super important project. So we've, as part of that community, have spent considerable time to also share back our insights of different parts that will allow this framework to continue and evolve over time and stay current.
Right. And another aspect that I didn't mention back when I created that consulting firm, one of our products just aimed to, it was like a breach and attack simulation product, right? Except we did it as a service, and in about 90 minutes. And it was designed not to be something that we would sell, but something that we would use to show the need for our services, where we would just emulate some of the more common TTPs that you would expect to see in pretty much any attack, whether it's ransomware, state-sponsored, whatever. Like, these are things the attacker has to do to reach their goals. And most of our customers were mid-market, so they all had MSSPs. And it was very interesting seeing them looking at their phones expectantly, waiting for their phone to blow up, emails to come in, texts, phone call from their MSSP. And 100% of the time, I've never seen an MSSP call them up. So I'm kind of curious about who your customer. I mean, I understand, that there are, reputationally some good MSSPs out there, but a lot that seem to miss a lot of things. So are they your customers as well, or are you mostly working with folks large enough to have their own SOCs who don't use MDRs or MSSPs?
Yeah, our typical market are for those that are really larger, have their security operations center. By the way, as an interesting note, we very quickly found out that almost all organizations outsource to some degree. So there's kind of outsourcing to an MSSP is not a on or off. It's basically there are many shades of gray, if you may, right? The question of, am I outsourcing tier one triage? Am I outsourcing my analysts, my engineers, the more advanced incident response? So there are many aspects to security, and many of the organizations choose, for example, not to have the hurdle and effort and cost of running 24/7 triage of alerts, and they outsource that aspect. So many organizations outsource something, but we are definitely targeting those organizations that own their detection posture, as we call it. That basically a term that we've coined to in some way express the level of readiness to detect. How well are we prepared given our current tools and their configuration, how they're implemented, how well are we prepared to detect the next attack, right? So those companies, those are enterprises, typically, those medium to large enterprises will not give up that notion because they understand it's so critically important. Therefore, that's where we started our journey, focusing on these enterprises, kind of serving today medium to large enterprises across the world, from 200 employees to 200,000 employees. So that is kind of the market we started with. But we definitely believe that there is huge need and potential also in the MSSP market. And I believe that in many cases, it's not that the MSSPs are not knowledgeable about security or trying to provide good service. Is where I believe it breaks is exactly in this aspect that we're talking about here today, that question of implementation, right? Because you can have the best rule set, the best detections in the MSSP's infrastructure, but if you are not sending the right things are not properly configured, you don't know if you're monitoring all of the assets all of the time, providing detection coverage, effective detection coverage across all those assets in a consistent way, then we are basically witnessing this end result where, in effect, they're not providing a good coverage because, again, that gap between theory and practice. In theory, they can provide awesome security. In practice, it's misaligned basically with the customer's infrastructure. And again, back to my previous point, a moving target. Even if it for a single instant it was perfectly set up, 2 seconds later, something changes. One configuration can change, and now we're again misaligned. We're starting to lose coverage, kind of that drift, right? Configuration drift, maybe detection coverage drift, we can call it. So basically, it's extremely hard to keep the things working just because of that sheer complexity.
Yeah, and a lot of that isn't something that you have access to or that you can even troubleshoot from your perspective, right? Like one of the things we'd find with 1,700 devices reporting in is, devices are constantly getting updated. Like we'd have one appliance get updated, and now the log format has completely changed. So the parsing is broken. Any rules built on that are now all broken. Or one day the Linux admins, redid something and blew away all the syslog.confs. So all of a sudden syslog is not sending anywhere. We don't find out. Syslog is very much, if you miss it, it's gone almost forever. So 3 weeks later, somebody notices, hey, you know what? Why aren't we getting anything from Linux syslog anymore? And you're not going to see a detection because you're just not getting the raw data, right?
Exactly. And we've asked, that question, many times, and the war stories you're hearing are kind of incredible. Every single time you're shocked with, a new CISO coming into an organization, getting green reports from their MSSP. Everything's green, everything's covered. Check. All the reports. And at some point, he gets suspicious. He goes into the details and finds that they're monitoring 5% of their endpoints, right? And that so it's basically just a fraction of the assets. And also, the other kind of stories are, there you have cyber analysts. We ask basically an organization, how do you tell when a detection is broken? It's no longer effective. It's not providing the detection coverage it was designed for. They say, oh yeah, from time to time, a cyber analyst comes and say, that alert, I remember seeing that for a long time. Can you give it a look, and check? Then again, 5-6 months later, too late, they found out that it was broken and misconfigured. So these are just happening on a daily basis, and really illustrate kind of the challenge involved.
So at least back in 2017, 2018, it seemed like breach and attack simulation, this category of products, was going to be the chocolate to detection engineering's peanut butter, right? It seemed like that would be the answer to, every single day it would check and make sure that you're, what you would expect to fire when an event occurs is actually firing, that you can actually see it. It would actually hook in on the defender side and say, yes, I was able to see myself simulate this attack. But I'm not getting the sense that it ever really achieved that role. So, kind of curious the answer to that question, how do you know this is working? The answer to the false negative question, because that's kind of the worst nightmare for a defender, right? Is that I've got all this visibility, all this tooling set up, all these people sitting in a SOC, and things are just silently failing, and I'm actually getting attacked, but everything's all green.
Yeah, and maybe to your kind of to that point you made about breach and attack simulation tools, I think they're an amazing tool. But the problem is, if you imagine that security engineering team, it's typically super small. We're talking about 2-3 people max. Sometimes it's like half a employee, 50% of their time they're spending on this aspect, and they're generally speaking underwater, right? They're firefighting. The problem with breach and attack simulation is that they pull up a report, they tell you, here are all the problems. Now that person was already underwater, just sinks deeper, right? Now their backlog just got 100 more tasks that they didn't have time for in the first place. So although, again, knowing is important, that there is still a challenge of how are you able to remediate those gaps, right? So remediate, and to be exact, I'm not talking about remediating a breach, but remediating a gap in readiness, right? I know that I'm unprepared to detect something. Now, what am I doing about it proactively before the attack happens? And that is a huge challenge for those teams. And so I think, again, running those tests, just like, maybe if we do the parallel to the world of software development, right? So you have developers who build the software, and you have a QA team that is testing that software, right? So having QA is super, super important to assure quality. But you also need that super expert, code ninjas that can actually build that complex application. So you need both of those to be successful. That is kind of, again, what brought us to focus on the security engineering side of the house. The question of, how can you automate the process of building the cyber defense tools, or that cyber defense posture out of those tools, because again, it requires so many details to be right. There are a million things that need to be right, and getting all those things right is extremely complex. So in terms of, basically taking kind of a white box approach. So basically starting from the tools and asking the question, are the tools properly configured? Are there internal inconsistencies within how they're configured? Are there missing policies within those rules? So, for example, if a SIEM does not have a rule to detect a certain type of technique, there's no point even in running the test in the first place. You know for sure you're going to fail the test. So no point in even running the test. What you need to be focusing on is implementing that missing best practice control or detection rule to gain that additional coverage.
And what are your thoughts as far as, you talking about them being underwater? You need these specializations. There's a lot of manual work here. How much of this can be automated away? Like, I imagine you've done some testing into, okay, here's something that it does seem to me, despite all the hype, we often talk about the hype with AI, that this is one of the areas, where AI should be able to automate away, at least gathering contextual data, pointed at something, ask it questions. It seems like it should be able to make some difference here in especially with these mundane tasks, some of these troubleshooting tasks, some of these, build me a detection rule that does this. I've seen some demonstrations. I think I saw Eric Capuano demonstrate just building SIEM rules using ChatGPT, and this is like a month after it was released. So how much is generative AI or AI ML in general able to kind of help with this? I don't know, the talent problem in SOCs and in detection and response in general.
For sure, and I think it's in many different kind of layers, right? Because first, if you think about kind of one of the basic problems we talked about here, right? We have rule depending on certain logs being received, and now something, we upgrade a certain tool and the log format changes. Now there's an incompatibility. Now to check for that, you would supposedly need to ask your super expert, super expensive detection engineer to go day after day to check each one of these rules. What do they depend on? Is that prerequisite in place? Is it actually fulfilled? Can that detection work? Are all the prerequisites met? And that type of work is unbelievably mundane and kind of repeating, kind of exhausting, where there is actually not a high level expertise required, very repetitive, which is a classical case for even the most basic automation, right? Just creating software to automate that process takes away that mundane task, gives them the peace of mind that things are always working, and they can focus on more high value types of work. So some aspects can simply be automated even without AI. But AI definitely plays a super important role here, because if you think about it, the question of detection engineering is a super multivariate problem. You need to take into account the relevant technologies, the current configurations, the different threats, right? So understanding the interconnectivity between how a detection can detect certain types of attacks given certain types of inputs, understanding what that depends on, what changes in the environment can affect that rule. So that creates a super complex problem, and that's where the AI can play a significant role in being able to cope with that, with huge amounts of data, right? So, of course, if you show each one of these examples to a human being, sure, they can, of course, do it. But again, the magnitude is where he gets lost. Now you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rules you already have. There are thousands of potential rules. Maybe you need them, maybe you don't. You have dozens and sometimes hundreds of technologies in your infrastructure. Yeah, so everything is multiplied by such numbers that bringing AI to solve this problem allows you to cope with just the magnitude of data, which otherwise those teams are typically just overwhelmed with. And finally, and that is kind of an aspect that we, just like everyone, I realized to remember you mentioned RSA, and I'm looking forward to meet you there. If we'll get a chance, that'll be awesome. And last RSA, I remember it was 100% at Gen AI. 100% of the conversations were about that topic. So we of course. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I remember. Yeah, last year it was already dominating all the conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really amazing, and it was amazing to see how fast. I believe, in my professional experience, this is by far the fastest adoption I've seen of a technology. It was like instantly, everybody were talking about it, implementing it into their products, expecting it in products, looking at the security aspect. It was just instant, adoption of that technology, which was really amazing to see. And we, of course, immediately also saw the potential to help in specific aspects of detection engineering. I think my personal belief about Gen AI is that it should be leveraged for an AI assisted approach, right? Where you keep in mind that there is a person in the loop that is reviewing all the output, right? So you don't let it go make decisions. I believe that's the wrong use case. It's very unpredictable in how it makes decisions. It's very hard to understand its confidence. But if you're asking for help, for example, summarizing or textualizing or creating a suggested rule, if you can, after it's been done, review what was done, what the output, it can do amazing things and save a lot of time and increase efficiency in amazing ways as well. So we are also kind of adding those capabilities to our product and many others. I believe today, Microsoft, Sentinel, Google Chronicle, CrowdStrike, all these vendors are adding these capabilities, and they're driving very impressive results and efficiencies into the SOC.
Well, yeah, I mean, I imagine for your own product, doing QA, that process is going to be somewhat similar to what defenders, buyers using your product are going to have to do to make sure these detections work. They're configured correctly. They're tied to the data. All those kinds of things, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, having been on the product side, we're going to jump to the attack matrix next, but just want to ask a quick question. I see that you support several different SIEMs and different SOC technologies. But I imagine these don't all have feature parity. So I imagine you're not pushing the same thing to each of these. Well, I guess I would assume that's kind of the question here. Like, how much do you have to customize your product to get the most out of, say, a Chronicle versus Microsoft Sentinel versus QRadar? Are these highly customized to the different features that each of these platforms have?
Yes, definitely. We chose, I think that was maybe one of the first dilemmas we've had, whether to go with a very shallow approach, but very wide, kind of going wide and connecting to dozens and dozens of tools, but really not understanding how they work internally, right? What can make them break, right? Really understanding their inner workings. And we chose the latter, right? We chose to actually go deep. So basically the level of integration that we are doing, I believe is kind of unprecedented, basically in the level of how we understand these tools. We understand what makes them tick, what internal interdependencies exist, to a point where we can basically connect to one of any of those that you listed, and within an hour, basically identify internal inconsistencies that cause basically the between 15 and 20% of detections to be ineffective and not operational just because of those inconsistencies. Right. And basically, that stems from a super deep understanding, which we of course invest heavily in and a lot of expertise and very deep integrations through the APIs. And that it takes time, a couple of months per technology, per SIEM, just to build that capability and have it provide that level of automation also that we're aiming for, which is extremely high. So kind of automating the process from identifying gaps, deriving proposed remediations, simulating that remediation to see if it's going to work, and once approved by the customer, to actually deploy those remediations requires an extremely high level of automation and integration into those products.
Yeah, and I think that's the right move too, from a product strategy perspective. I imagine your customer success team probably has an easier time with the deep approach, than it would have with the shallow approach. They constantly be hearing, I wish you guys, did something with this native feature, that's only in that product. So I think that path probably leads to better customer satisfaction, right?
Yep, I agree, and hopefully we can take it from there and gradually grow and expand the scope and kind of bit by bit, be able to solve this kind of huge problem that we're trying to tackle across the entire security stack.
Right. Yeah. So MITRE ATT&CK. I often think of initially when MITRE ATT&CK came out. I mentioned breach and attack simulation before. There's this kind of I think that initially the way a lot of people were going about it is they were like, okay, we're going to build a detection for everything in it. But the way I think of it is, MITRE ATT&CK is kind of like a dictionary. It's got every word in the language, but, just because there's a dictionary with every word in the language doesn't mean, if I write a book or something like that, I have to use every word. Some of those words don't get used very often. And not too long ago, SIEM came out with a meta study of, I think specifically ransomware reports, where they mapped what the findings in those reports to the MITRE ATT&CK framework to kind of get like a heat map, right? Like an idea of, okay, which TTPs actually get used at all versus like which of them are very common and which of them are less commonly seen. So the question here is, how do you tackle that from your perspective, from what Cardinal Ops does in terms of, like, you probably don't want to have to manage a detection, for everything in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So how do you prioritize?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And definitely, I think it's just that notion that you mentioned of prioritization, having heat maps, not thinking of MITRE ATT&CK as that flat, uniform surface that, either you cover everything or you don't. You really need to think about this as a North Star, right? And eventually, you need to be able to have complete coverage for everything relevant to you. But like everything else in security, we need to work in a prioritized fashion. We need to understand what's critical, what is important, what can target us first, what has the highest likelihood. So that is exactly our approach as well. So basically, we take two approaches here. One of them is where we're providing kind of external insight on priorities. We're basically saying, we're taking into account threat intelligence, of course, which is the perfect fit for this use case, is to understand what's happening in the wild, right? What is actually taking place, what attackers are leveraging. And today, maybe back also to your question or comment on communities, I think this is also an important aspect, because companies are sharing reports about incidents, and they can leverage this unified MITRE ATT&CK language, kind of that lingua franca, right? That dictionary, as you called it, to share that information. Then we can learn and speak the same language, so we can learn from the experience of others. So we can actually see what's happening and start to rank different types of attacks and techniques on the MITRE ATT&CK matrix by how prevalent they are, right? And we can rank them by relevance to the specific organization. Do they have the relevant technologies? If this attack is super prevalent but happens on Linux boxes, which you don't have, you shouldn't be worried about it, right? There are aspects also about the kind of the impact aspects. How likely, how severe is the impact of that action? Does that provide the attacker with domain admin credentials, or is it something that is much less, just creating a file, right? So there are many kind of levels of severity, risk, prevalence, again, applicability. So there are many factors that can be taken into account into that, but we also are mindful of the fact that we don't have a crystal ball. We can't take into account all the parameters, and it's very important also for the enterprise to share what is important to them. They understand the business in some way. You can define the role of the CISOs to be able to translate between the business and the security risk. So being able to say, this is what we are afraid of. This is what will cause an impact to our organization. These are our critical crown jewels. So all those are also critically important when prioritizing where should you focus first, right? And both in terms of the attacker techniques, but also in terms of assets, etc., to make sure that you're first tackling those critical assets against the most relevant, prevalent attacks, and also business critical applications, etc. So mixing all those parameters together is the way to really achieve an optimal approach, in my view.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good point. Like one of the comparisons I use is, maybe a bank is less concerned with denial of service attacks when the exploiting whatever vulnerability causes a service to go down. Whereas, if you're like a multiplayer online game, data leaked about your customers, your players might hurt you, but being offline for 2 weeks might kill you, might kill the company. So different, different priorities there. So is that a very manual process? Because like the example you give is, if I don't have any Linux, I've got no use for, Linux only detections, right? Like is that something that's fairly automated at these days? And, you pulling in some asset discovery data or something like that to determine that? How manual is that process of picking, okay, which detection rules matter to me?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of things that can be automated. As I said, we have a high bar in terms of automation. So there are many things. So if we think about it, the SIEM, for example, which was the first integration that we chose to start with, is actually a hub. It integrates into dozens and dozens of IT infrastructure technologies and tools and products, and it integrates into dozens of security tools feeding into that central aggregation point. So just by analyzing and understanding all those integrations and looking at the logs that are being produced, it's possible to learn a huge amount about what's out there. But of course, you can only see what you can see, right? So you don't know what you don't know. And for that purpose, just to exactly to your point, the way to do that is integrate into those asset discovery CMDBs of the world. Axonius, that I think you mentioned in one of your headlines, is one of the pioneers there. So really being able to know kind of what is the ground truth about what's out there, right? And that is kind of allows you to gain that completeness of vision and visibility. I think prioritizing within assets is something that is maybe still mostly manual. Maybe it's already been done in one of those CMDBs, but generally it's kind of in, let's call it, broad strokes, if you know what I mean, like basically saying this is a production environment, right? This is PCI. I have to be 100% there. I can't afford a breach there with compliance. This is the technology I'm using for my critical database assets. So it comes down typically to a list of about 10 things I care about. So it's not about going into each and every file or each and every IP address. That's kind of unmanageable, I think. So it's generally speaking, here are areas that I'm more concerned about. Let's focus on those, or I don't know, SAP, right, or some kind of that kind of super large business application. That's what I'm worried about. That's what keeps me up at night. Let's focus on that. So the generally speaking, it's something that requires limited time to basically list and update that from time to time as the organization also adopts new technologies and evolves over time.
Yeah, I often call that the customization cost. Your product can only be as tailored for any individual customer. To some extent, products like these and SIEMs, especially have to be customized to their whatever their priorities are, whatever their needs and constraints, and however many people they have to handle this stuff. So you try and minimize the cost of customization as much as possible, but it's always going to be there.
Right. And maybe a thought I have there is that if you gain very high level of automation, in some sense, the criticality of prioritization goes down a little bit, right? Because you're not so constrained with what you can do. You don't have such constrained resources where you're saying, okay, I can do only 3. Which 3 are those? If you can do 300,
that's a good point.
So right, it's like it's a bit easier on that regard. So they have kind of there is a kind of interrelationship between the two.
All right, but before we wrap our conversation, I'm just curious. I think you've mentioned that your organization has contributed some new TTPs to MITRE. I wonder if there's any interesting ones there, any stories there that you might want to share before we have to wrap up here.
Yeah, I think basically when we are researching different learning about different attacks and searching for ways to detect them, we are always kind of looking for that way to map the entire attack process from end to end to the MITRE attack. So, for example, one of the sub techniques that we shared was a case where we saw attackers are staging malware on servers to then be downloaded by these exploits running after the initial access, and basically we kind of found out there's no word in the dictionary, right? So that's why the dictionary should be there, and I think really the amazing thing about MITRE is that it stayed relevant because so much community effort has come into that. And so many people, when they ran into that missing word, did not throw out the dictionary. They actually, what they did is spend time to document it, share that with the MITRE Corporation, and then and actually contribute to the community to take that dictionary to the next level. And I think that's amazing for not just, of course, our small team that had a small contribution, but to the entire community.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think it took something like a government effort here, to have something that the community values enough, that they, see it as some partial ownership there, to where they care enough to submit the new stuff that they come up with, because there's value in having, the community dictionary up to date for everybody. So it's been really great to see that, and of course they've got Kev also. We've got, between CISA and MITRE, we've got all kinds of great resources we didn't have 10 years ago.
Definitely agree. It's great to see how we are kind of advancing as a community.
Yeah. All right, Michael, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed this conversation. Had a lot of questions here that I hadn't really been able to ask anybody yet that I got to ask you. So I appreciate you for coming on Enterprise Security Weekly today and answering all my stupid questions.
Not at all. It was really my pleasure. And thanks again for having me here.
All right. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News. Stick around.